And we are live. It is another Freedom Friday, but it's a Freedom Friday like no other that we've had before because the nation is burning. People are upset. It is not stopping. Cities are like never before coming together in a syndicate of uprests. We've seen unrest before when it has happened in one city, Los Angeles. We've seen it when it's happened in multiple cities. In the 60s, for those who weren't alive then, there were protests across the country. Cities burned. And out of that burning came a reset. And all those cities started kicking out goodies. They started creating black commissions and black councils and putting money into what should we do for the Negroes? How should we build their schools? What social service programs? How many of their revolutionaries can we hire so that they can become part of the system? And where we are now, again, today, it took a long time to get back to having that type of uprising. I said to my brothers here who are here this morning, Charles Cole, Dr. Charles Cole, welcome. Thank you, brother. And Dr. Sharif Elmeki. I've said to both of them before that it's like America is got acid reflux and it's choking on its own inequity right now. It's like coughing it up. And you know, hopefully it feels better. But I have since changed my analogy to being from acid reflux to being like an enema, because America has been full of shit for so long that it is time, that it is time to admit that and make something else happen. What I want to talk about today, we usually talk about history on Freedom Fridays, Black history that is germane to today's environment, today's problems and issues that we face. So what I wanted to do, Sharif and Charles, is tie in this idea that it's a good time for a reset on the relationship that we have had with government, the schools of government, and to admit this was never our system. And we've been putting our kids in it. We've entrusted our kids to the same system that shoots rubber bullets at us, tear gases us for peaceful protests, arrests us for our own victimizing, and then wants to teach our kids. They want to take over the brains of our children at age 5 and have them until grade 12. And somehow we think that's going to work out. Welcome, brothers. Thank you for being here this morning.
Good to be here, man. Good to be here. Sorry, the circumstances, obviously, but good to see Dr. Cole in the house today. Freedom Fridays.
I mean, you know, I'm just glad I can help out, man. You know what I'm saying? I've been doing a whole bunch of Joy podcasts, so this is bringing me back into, you know, into it. You know what I mean?
Every time you think you're out, they're gonna pull you back in.
Well, you know what? It's funny that he started that way because my young people we did a stream last night and it was really good. And you know, they just made a list of all the things that their schools are not teaching them and all the extra stuff their families have to do, and how they've realized at a young age that this system isn't working for them. And that can be pretty sobering for a 16-year-old. So I think you own to something. And I'm going to just end up sharing a list because it was wisdom in it.
Well, I want you to share two things, Charles, that gets us kicked off, because one of the main ideas of this show today, of Freedom Friday, is for us to connect for our community the way in which this is not our system. It never was really intended to educate us to freedom. It was intended to educate us into compliance. You mentioned to me something out of the book clubs that you've been doing that I really didn't know much about, and that was the curriculum takeover at some point in history. And I thought maybe you can start us just telling us a little bit about that part of the history, because it's important for us to know that this wasn't our system.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Reef is part of that club, so he can actually chime in and keep me honest on that too. Here, let me scoot over here so I'm out the there we go. So one of the things that we learned, so a lot of people don't know that Black people in the South are the reason why free public education is a thing. And the Southern white farmers did not want them to be able to get educated at all, but they saw that this train was moving, right? And they're like, okay, well now actually we want our kids to like have the same education. And when they found out that they couldn't stop Black people from going and chasing education, they said, well, we'll take over the curriculum and we'll like do an indoctrination, right? Like we'll talk about these things. And, you know, I don't know if y'all saw it. I did a history lesson video. It was about 20 minutes. And I had two young people in Oakland that were 19 and 20 years old. And one said that Oakland's never rose up like this before. And it hurt me because it's like, one, you're from Oakland and don't know about the Black Panthers. And two, they said white people never act like this. They never are violent or whatever. And I gave 6 examples where white folks took it in blood, right? Like, and took it. And we asked the question, though, that we begged the question, why is it that in our free public education system that we force Black people to have to attend and we ridicule them when they want to do something different? Why is it that a Black person ain't learning, one, about themselves, and two, about how this country was really built? So, you know, when you read Education of Blacks in the South, it tells you why. It tells you how that works. It shows you the playbook and process of how power protects itself. Well, we didn't want these Negroes to have schools, but since they got them, well, we're going to take over the curriculum. Oh, they getting a little smarter about that. Well, we're going to limit exactly what schools they can go to. Oh, well, they actually got their own schools that's in this private system. Well, now it's time to integrate and fire all the Black people. Right. So these are plays, right? None of this stuff was by happenstance. And the worst thing you do is underestimate your enemy, right? The worst thing you can do is just think they're flippant or dumb and write them off. Like, no, there was a plan. This is the one thing that was actually most shocking to me. And I think Sharif was on the call when we said this, and I'll shut up because I know I'm long-winded. But they had the seeds for globalization in that moment. The argument that the South made around, if Black people learn how to read and get education, we wouldn't be able to use it for cheap labor, and we'll have to go out of the country to backfill all that cheap labor. So the economy that we have today has roots early on, before Black folks even had a right to a free public education.
And just to put a point on that, what you're saying right now is that it was discovered by the system or the leaders of the system that education could be a tool for domination, not necessary for liberation.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's a seed in our public education system. It's not a flaw. It's a seed within the system.
It is a strategic art of war move. It was something that it was part of an actual plan. And reading does this, right? You like, this book isn't hiding somewhere. You can go get it and read it. I'll show you the chapter. We'll let you know on what page it is, right? Or for the people that don't like to read, go watch Book of Eli. I don't know if you've seen Book of Eli, right? But that guy wanted to get that Bible because he knew that something that was used to fill the spirits and set people free. Like, he knew that he could turn that around and use it as a weapon. He said, this isn't a book, it's a weapon. And, so if you want the Cliff Notes version, but yes, exactly what you said, Chris. This system was not built for us, and it's doing exactly what it was intended to do. We just on D of A through Z's plan.
Mm-hmm. Elmeki, when you hear that as part of that's part of the past and it's part of the present, because it's in the past, it was a plan, it was an idea, it was a seed of the system that we have. And today, cities are burning. It might be a good time to reset our relationship. Dr. Cole says all the time, Black parents, you're on your own. I just read an article this morning that's talking about, during the pandemic now, guess who has fallen the most behind? Guess who's getting the least out of remote learning? Guess you don't have to guess. You know what that looks like. You know the numbers and who falls behind in everything. So it's a good time for a reset, to rethink that relationship between home and school, parent and teacher, system and child. And my slogan I like to say all the time, it's time for the separation of child and state. So what do you think about this moment, the reset, how history helps us decide what's smart to do next?
Yeah, I mean, everything. I want to just double down with what Dr. Cole saying. I'm so glad that he has this book club and launches. I'm going to share this quote. I hate the quote, but I'm going to share it because sometimes people think it's just about Black people. But I also heard this quote in Iran applied to Iranians. And it's basically like, to the effect of, if you want to hide something from Negroes, put it in a book. You want to hide something from Black folks, put it in a book, right?
That's terrible.
And so it's so important for us to. So when Frederick Douglass says, knowledge makes you unfit to be a slave, that applies to today. You're still enslaved if you allow them to use the system and separate your child from actual education. Give them schooling, but not education. Teach them to be compliant, but not teach them to be empowered, right? And so all of those things happen. And when Dr. Cole talks about this globalization of, if they become educated, that's what they're saying. Like, they'll be unfit to be enslaved. They'll be unfit to be oppressed. They'll be unfit. Because another part of there, when the South and the North started, the North was trying to convince them to be less overtly oppressive. The North was coming down, and so a lot of people think like, the Northerners, they were so good. That's the slice of paradise for Black people. And we saw what happened when Black people did go to the North through the Great Migration. We see what's happening in the North. I'm always talking about, Malcolm said, you live in down South or up South. There is no difference. But the South, what the North told the South to do in their public education system was, if you do it right, you'll have better servants. It'll be better servitude, experience from Black people. You'll see them in compliance, and you'll get better outcome. You'll become richer. So don't fight them. Let them in and take over their brains in this way. And so when Malcolm says, and you've quoted this a lot, Chris, where he says, only a fool will turn their children over to their oppressors or to the enemy to be educated, right? Only the fools. Who's being foolish, right? And so we see that now over and over again. And I just want to fast forward a little bit from the book, and then I'll pause. The NAACP, at some point, and the Supreme Court, when we talked in Freedom Fridays a couple of weeks ago with Brown versus Board, NAACP wanted you to believe that this internalized oppression that our children face, the self-hatred that our children face, was just a result of being around Black people. Not
being specifically with Black people, only with Black people. Yeah.
Exactly. That everything that you face, all the oppression you face, all the trauma that you face is because you're in all Black schools, not because of white savagery. They didn't want to. They didn't want to point it to that. So imagine if they would have said, "No, this is all because of white savagery." Wherever our children are being educated, let's make sure that it is, applied. And then we just saw the NAACP continuing to do that, where they would run around the country, wherever Malcolm, for example, or anybody like that who was speaking truth to power, they would get to that city beforehand and try to shut them, get the contract canceled or get the church closed or get, Malcolm was Muslim, but a lot of his speeches were in churches. But the NAACP looked at them like, yo, no, we got to get you shut out of this. And so you just see, as he's traveling the country, they're one step ahead, trying to shut down these conversations. Like, don't talk about schools. Don't talk about that. This is, they're the enemy. And so we got our work to cut out, to brothers.
What you mentioned in there that I think is important for the discussion is that if education was always seen as a strategic tool to further our subservience, it didn't happen without helpmates in our own community. You mentioned the NAACP. You can't actually successfully keep people unaware of the system that you're putting them in without helpers, people who help, guide and usher you into that door. Here's the public education door. This is integration. This is best for you. Integrate into a burning house. Give us your children. Oh, these people mean good by you. Let's put your children more with them, not less with them, because the more you're with them, the freer you'll be, right? So it feels like part of the strategy also is to have helpmates within our own community. So at a time like this right now, what should we be saying for consciousness raising to our people about, no matter whether Black or white, anybody who comes to you to sell you the idea that your best option is to hand your child over to the same government that is shooting you with bullets, rubber bullets, and tear gassing you? That's a bad deal. Don't do it. What's the consciousness raising play right now?
I don't want. I don't want to just jump in. You know what I
Well,
mean?
jump in, man.
You got
Do
to
it.
call on
Jump
folks.
in,
You know,
jump in.
I'm
Jump
waiting
in,
for the
man. Do it.
signpost. I mean, listen. I think, you know, again, you get threatened with jail if you don't send your kids to school in this country, right? And you know, some people don't have options where they are, or they feel like they don't have a choice in good options. I think that you have to. It sucks, but you have to supplement it. You even if you're forced to put your kids in that thing, you have to put them. You're about to send your kids off to mental warfare, then you have to put the armor on them every single day. And when they come home, you got to take that armor off. You got to clean out those wounds. You got to dust them off, and you got to get them built back up to go back into that place. And that sounds like an awful lot to have to do with the child and as a family every day. But, you know, war times call for, you know, war processes. And I mean, that's what I think. And, you know, every time I hear Sharif talk or, you know, when he talks about, I've been on this Black fathers hype, right? I just really have as of late. And, you know, there's a way, and mothers do it too, but there's a way that, you know, fathers talk to their kids and like, look, I don't care what they doing over there. This is what we doing over here. And, you know, and the good ones will say, go learn. Go learn how they kind of try to use power and how they do it, you know, and turn into learning teachable moments, but then reinforce their own stuff. And I put in your comments, I put that history lesson, right? Because it was quick. I did it in 15 minutes, right? 20 minutes, but it was like, here goes 6 moments of how these people will seize power from us and that savagery that you're talking about. So, you know, you have to balance it. You got to be the counterbalance if you got to send your kid to that stuff. Because I like people that can exercise their ability to choose and put and use different options and everything like that. But I do remember my mother like being threatened with jail if I ended up going to a different school outside the district, right? And so, you know, nobody wants to do that. So I don't want to overspeak my answer. So that's what I would say. You got to put the armor on your kids every single day and sharpen their swords.
I think that's a great answer, though, and just in this one way is it's not so easy as just saying, "Oh, the system isn't for us," and then doing something different. The something different costs money. There's not a ton of options to do something outside of the system, and the system really is designed to keep ushering you back into itself. You try and break off into a charter school or a school that has some sort of scholarship or whatnot, and they try to kind of usher you back in. Either they use policy to cut the roads off for you to get out, or they beat up on policies that allow you to get out, or they use kind of a more, I think, a better art of war scenario, which is just to use kind of the soft fascism of language, you know, the making it unpopular to do freedom things, to get out of the system, to make it popular to be beholden and loyal to the system. I'm proudly public schools. I love my public schools. Oh my God, my public schools. I love them. I love them. And to me, that sounds like, you know, somebody skipping and dancing about, I love me some slavery. Oh my God. You know, it feels that way when I hear it. I know that sounds dramatic to anybody listening. I know it sounds dramatic. Don't get me wrong. I know that. But man, how can you read so much history and not come to the idea that this ain't for you? This isn't something to be jumping up and down and buck dancing about. Like, these schools aren't yours.
You just touched on something, and again, you know, I'm gonna go back into my corner because this is not the 8 Black Hands. This is not my show.
Right, it's 6 Black Hands this morning. So,
but Sharif talked about that earlier. Most people don't know that history, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not. Most people are education pedestrians. You're not, right? Like, you're in it. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are civilians. And we asking civilians to understand the art of war in something that they're not studying and training for every day. You do, right? So my question would be, how do we prepare these civilians, these education pedestrians, right? I don't say that flippantly or disrespectful. I'm pedestrian to a lot of different things, just not here. But how do we, you know, equip and armor somebody like that hasn't been studying the system and that doesn't know it? And I think you are, by exposing it and telling these stories and finding connection points and taking the over intellectualizing of these terms and stuff, and just like have that real talk conversation like you all do. I think that's how you do it.
Sharif, how do you do what Charles just said, like build the armor for your kids? I noticed more than one person in our comments. Michelle Johnson talked about Dr. Cole. You're describing the armor that she had to put on to go to an elite private school. So it's kind of like, it's not like just because you get out of the main system, you're like free to go. You might find it anywhere. So what's the armor we should be giving our children? I'll give you my quick history. That to me, that's it right there. History. That's my answer. But what would you say is the answer that we should be giving our children that fortifies them up before we put them in this world, send them out in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important, the best use of time, what in education circles called OST, out of school time. The best thing to do, spend our time doing, is ensuring that students, our Black students, don't view themselves the way that America views them. That they don't view themselves and their communities the way that the school system and many of their teachers may view them. Because you're not going to be there over their shoulders 24/7. And children often will internalize something and not necessarily share it. You see so many adults who say, hey, once when I was younger, this happened to me. They never shared it with their parents, right? And so in order to make sure you're positively, they have this positive racial identity, this positive sense of self. It's the armor and the shield, but you also have to make sure that your home and your interaction with them is also a detox center.
Ooh.
So even with the armor and the shield, imagine it's more of smoke. So yeah, they'll be able to see the overt racism, and they may even be daring enough to call it out when an adult, because often we send messages of do what the adult says. And so children internalize that to mean 100%. That's a holistic statement. Respect your elders, and that's truth. But there's another truth that when you say that, you also have to say, respect your elders. And if you ever feel disrespected by an elder, let me know. We don't always couple that language to give that child this sense of agency and empowerment, and to be able to discern. Too many of our Black students, they take the legacy parenting that we give them. Right. Then when I say legacy parenting, it's like, hey, you're a child, stay in that child's space. They may encounter racism, and internally they still shy away from not only confronting it or even sharing it with their parents, because they remember this is what I've been told. Right. And so we have to make sure that part of our parenting, we are parenting as if they are going out into, oppressive society. They're going. When we were in Iran, I met a lot of Iraqi refugees. How they raised their children when they were in war zone was that there were landmines everywhere. You're careful where you walk, and if you see something that looks weird, you come let me know. So we have to couple the legacy parenting as if there's warfare being waged on our kids, because we know that it is.
Yeah, when your child is born, there's this idea about children being tabula rasa, meaning they're born kind of a blank slate, and they're naturally, you can decide for yourself, they're either naturally good or naturally neutral. And then the moment after they're born, something happens to me in the United States with the Black child, which is they insert an operating system. It's a self-hate operating system that grows over time and develops multiple viruses in your child. And that child actually isn't dysfunctional. That child is a function of the operating system that has been implanted into them by people around them, sometimes with your help, but definitely the government and the system is actually training your child with a massive preset of lies. Lies about themselves, their culture, where they come from, how much they've contributed to the world, how much they've contributed to the country. There's no Black people on money, and money is the most important thing in the United States, right? When you talk about monuments and pictures and the State House and the courthouse and everywhere you go, there's long lines down hallways of white people, and that sends a message to your Black children: you've never done anything. You didn't invent libraries in Timbuktu. You didn't invent government in Egypt. You didn't invent all kinds of things that we take for granted today, like medicine and mathematics and geometry and whatnot. That you are disconnected from that. You know nothing.
Exactly.
I think the only fight back on that, though, is because you know that they're putting that operating system onto your child's hardware, is for you to create a massive counter story, a counter story that starts ahead of time, and you insert a library into them at an early age. When you guys think about what I just said long-windedly, what do you think is essential to go into that library that you put in the operating system of a child? What are the things that you teach them? What are the stories, the lessons, the histories? Which books do you put in their hand? How do you fight back with knowledge with your kids. And Charles, you don't have kids. You mention it all the time. So not with your kids, but these are your kids too. These are your kids. These are all your kids.
I mean, that's what I do, right?
On the way. What will you do?
I mean, stop it. That's what I do, right? I mean, if you get a chance to watch the stream we did last night, we did exactly that. I think that look at the examples that's around you that put that armor on and that help you and bring you back to center. So I'm going to use religion, like, so whether it's a church, temple, or mosque, every one of those places says we are of this world, we're not in it, right? Like, we're in this world, we're not of it, right? And understand that. So your house has to be that temple every day that they come back, right? And you got to return to the temple. So I remember being in church and there was just a reiteration of our values. Like, this is what they're doing, this is what they're teaching. You have counter programming, and it's actually a little easier to do today. So, like, be involved, understand what they putting in your kids' heads. And you can find a YouTube video of history or something that actually counters that and having these conversations, right? Like, you actually can use this opportunity and flip it and make your child even sharper, because but you have to be intentional about that deprogramming. You have to be intentional about that piece. So you're asking the right questions and you're bringing that stuff in. I'll just say what our students asked for. Our students said they were pissed off and upset and disappointed in us adults. And they said, why don't I learn these things in school? I want to learn about finance, entrepreneurship, emotional intelligence, true Black history, how America was truly built, and proper mental health. And they said, well, this is what my mom does. We had two students that talked about what their Black moms did. They said, my mother puts me in extracurricular activities and puts me around people that she wants me to aspire to learn from and things of that nature, because she knows there's a bit of information I can get from her, but she also knows there's other information that I can get out there. And she actively deprograms me from the things that I'm getting from school. And I thought that was powerful. I think that's extremely powerful, because the truth is, most of the kids that we focus on won't have an opportunity to go to that private school or that smaller school, that magnet school or that charter school, right? They're actually in this. They are in this state regulated curriculum that doesn't love them, right? It actually teaches them to be subservient, or teaches them that they're wild, or how do you get an Oakland child to say that Oakland has never stood up before, and they Black and they live in Oakland? Right? How do you, or them to say white people have never acted like this before, and you don't know that white folks been storming the Bastille in all the proverbial places in America when things don't go their way. They take it in blood, right? How does that happen? And it's because we're not actively deprogramming our kids.
I mean, it's a shame that we have to deprogram them, because that means they've been programmed, right?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, because that's what your system does, right? Your system. Sharif said it, right? In that book, again, don't get this hype that the North wasn't racist. Everybody was racist, okay? In the beginning of this, everybody was racist. They had different theories of action around what should happen with Black folks. The South just wanted you to work and not be able to read, so we can keep you at very, very low slave wages. But what the North said was even more sinister, right? Like, at least the South was very open about it. The North was saying, we're going to use this to socialize them. We're going to use this to actually put them in their place, so much so that we won't have to teach them this stuff later on. They'll teach it to themselves. Like, that's sinister. That's a generation over generational type of plan, right? Like Sharif will bring the famous quote up, like, if you really take this away from people, you ain't got to show them to the back door. When there isn't one, they'll build one. You know what I mean? And they've been very successful in doing that. That's why you got to deprogram, because this stuff is in all of us. Like, there are things that you will find yourself saying and thinking, and you'll be like, that's against me. Why would I even think? Why would something against me just come out of me with no provocation, right? It's because I have to actively do my deprogramming. Even now, even with all the stuff I read, I gotta read more of it. I just showed you the book that I'm about to read next, and that title was crazy by itself, right?
Show people that book. Yeah, with you there.
By Charles Cobb. It's called This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get
You Killed. That's right. And after that, Negroes with guns.
And let me say, right? Can I just read a part of the back of it? Because this is the most shocking part. Visiting Martin Luther King Jr.'s house during the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott, journalist William Worthy almost sat on a loaded pistol. just for self-defense, King assured him it was not the only weapon King kept for such a purpose. One of his advisors remembered the Reverend's Montgomery, Alabama home as an arsenal. Like this history, even when they teach you about you, even in this deeper, when they teach you about you, they don't tell you the truth. They will have you thinking that man was meek and scary. That man had an armory, right? Why would they leave that out, Chris? Why would they leave that out?
Because so this is what they do. I mean, they killed him as to make him the peaceful martyr, right? Okay. So they basically deveined him after death. They like took away all his teeth. They took away all his most kind of like problematic things about how capitalism works, how militarism works, how racism works, his anti-war stuff, his anti-poverty stuff. They want you to recite I have a dream over and over and over again, because they want to keep you in a dream state. Like the best Negro is one in a dream state or dead. There's only two like options there, and the one that becomes consciousness will become dead faster than anybody if they let people know they're conscious. So, yeah. So when you become conscious, black people, keep it a secret. Don't tell nobody in public.
And we'll hate you in life, but we'll build monuments for you, name streets after you, and put you on a stamp in your death.
Absolutely.
If you're white people who are on stamps and these monuments, they were the heroes while they were living, as well as after they were dead, and became legends after they were dead. For black people, they were enemies of the state while they were living, right? Martin Luther King, white folks hated, and a lot of black people hated him. Mm-hmm. Malcolm, you already know. Harriet Tubman, right? These are folks who were jailed, and they tried to ostracize them. And then afterwards, you would think that America, but this is part of the plan, right? It's like, hey, we'll pick your heroes, and after we defanged and deveined, and we pulled out their blood, like what they stood for, what they lived for, what they were put on earth to do, and what they died for. Cole, can you hold that book up again? Because I think it's really important. I want to make a connection to something that we did earlier on Freedom Fridays. So we talked about, this book, this nonviolent stuff will get you killed. Again, we talked about this idea that the danger of the single story, right? And often people will say that all the civil rights were created because of the protest, because of people, what America looked at as, I'm sorry, not because of how America looked at, if you want things done, be patient, things will get done, all this kind of thing. And people had to realize some of these rules and laws that were passed, it was after protest. It was like after Dr. King was murdered, then and the fire that time. Mm-hmm. Then after that, they was like, hey, let's rush this through Congress. When they always like, oh, things take time. It don't take time when they're like, oh, we better get something done. We better pacify the Negroes. They get stuff done. But this book, this nonviolent stuff will get you killed. If you notice, the author was Charlie Cobb. Thanks, Dr. Cole. The author is Charlie Cobb. And Charlie Cobb was part of, this was a man, and we spoke about this on Freedom Friday a few weeks ago. He was on his way to Houston to be trained to be an activist, right? And when we talk about, and Dr. Fuller talks about, you go to these workshops and these you sipping on coffee in this air conditioned room and all that kind of, and learning how to
he calls them hotel militants.
Yeah, the hotel.
Y'all a bunch of hotel militants. You wouldn't even bust a grape. That's what he says.
Bust a grape, My first started teaching to say, like, man, they can't fight a paper tiger, let alone a real one, right? So they're there with in these comfortable chairs and these comfortable beds, learning how to be activists. So he was on his way to one of those type of situations, but he wanted to see in Mississippi. So he was on his way. He left DC. He was on his way to Houston, but he said, I want to get out of Mississippi because that's where they killed Emmett Till. And that did not put fear in a bunch of black folks' hearts. It made them more outraged. It made them more committed to the movement. So he said, I got to see this. Like these people, like Mississippi is like the worst place for a black person to be on this globe, and folks are standing up. So he wanted to go see that. When he told those activists where he was about to go, they're like, you're going to learn in a classroom how to be an activist. You should stay here and be with us and be active. And so he decided to stay. So this is the same Charlie Cobb who wrote the letter to start freedom schools. So I wanted to make that connection. So he's writing that book and giving you this additional history. I wanted to give you the context of where he got his political education and activism. But he also he wrote the essay to the leaders of SNCC to create freedom schools. And
I think
so
that's such
what do you need? That out of school time, the detox center, the places that you get the dents and stuff out of the armor and shields. It's out of school. It's after school. It's in your homes. It's in your places of worship. It's in the rec centers. It's in the barbershops. Like, we have to look at all of that as spaces for political education to detox and armorize.
It's in line with that piece of history from SNCC. During that time, there were two strategies that were at play. One strategy was join the system, infiltrate, double cross, or infiltrate and join the system, be part of it, get some of the same benefits and spoils out of the system that everybody else gets out of the system. The other line of attack, which was more aligned with SNCC and the folks the younger folks that followed them, was to build counter institutions. So you had people in the Black Panthers, you had Stokely Carmichael,
Black Power.
Black Power, right? And Black Power was, at essence, was seen as having black institutions, black counter institutions that run counter to the one that is poisoning our people mentally and physically and economically. So the two lines of attack, either join or build, were imminent. So Bob Moses, who was part of SNCC, basically was quoted as saying, "Why do we need their schools? Why can't we build our own schools?" Right? Bob Moses, who eventually created the Algebra Project, because the schools that we put our kids in can't teach black children algebra, even though black people invented algebra, right? So Stokely Carmichael, Black Power, the Black Panthers, that more militant wing of black civil rights, whatever, that lost, right? And the group that won were the bougies, who basically said, join the system, get as near to white as possible, and you'll eventually become probationary white, and you'll eventually get the benefits of being probationary white. And then maybe one day you can hope and dream that your grandchildren will be actually white. So go ahead, bro.
That's brainwashing, but because whose blueprint were they following? They weren't following black people, a blueprint that had to be created for black people. They were following the blueprint of the Irish, the Italians,
the Italian, right?
Polish,
Jews,
the undesired white folks who came in, and that was the Jewish community, right? These are folks who in a couple generations, if they choose to, can lose whatever it was undesirable amount. America talks about this melting pot. It's not a melting pot. It only melts for those who want and can assimilate. And we have to recognize how they view blackness. That blueprint can't be used for how they view blackness, how they view brownness, if they want to be, or any other group that wants to maintain who they are and understand that maintaining who they are as a people is the survival. That is the survival.
I think, Diane Ravitch, who I always go back to because I think she's the godmother of the counter revolution, the revolution against kind of black educational freedom and educational freedom. The racist Diane Ravitch, who's in line with Al Shanker and the modern teacher union movement, which actually was built on crushing the black community's desires for its own schools in Ocean Hill, Brownsville in New York. And we did a show on that previously. One of the things that she extols about the public school system is how it took immigrants and made them into one people, into Americans. Like, it Americanized all these people through Ellis Island. All these people came through and they come out the other end like sausage, one sausage. They all went in as different kinds of meats, and then they came out the other end, one sausage, which is a lie because one sausage came out white and one sausage came out black, right? So when you just talked about the Americanizing of the Polish, the Irish, the Jews, the Italians. Before they did that, there was no real such thing as white as a standard, like a white standard. There were all these ethnicities, and some of the ethnicities were what we call white now today. They did make whiteness. They made it a property. They made it a thing. They created it, and then they made us opposed to whiteness. So we always got a separate seat. Exactly. Outside of that Americanizing. So if the public school was invented to Americanize and homogenize and make us one people, it failed in one important respect, and that's us. right? So what do? Do we keep trying to? That's a dumb question I'm about to ask. So let me go back and just say, if I back up in time and think about those two strategies, the NAACP strategy versus the Bob Moses SNCC strategy, is it too late to build our own counter institutions realistically? And if we were to assume that the NAACP strategy of joining the mainstream was never going to work, where does that leave us?
I don't think it's too late. I think you do both. I mean, even in my research and in my book, there's a part, and I want to pull it out and actually do a longer blog about it because it deserves more attention. But the invisible institution and how the church was the invisible institution and how they built codes right in front of these white folks to like educate us and do these things. I'm fascinated by it. My invisible institute, I try to recreate it, right? My invisible institution are my book clubs. I'm in two separate ones. And it's not the book club where you sit down and you have tea and crumpets and like, you know, you use it as an opportunity to get buzzed, right? Like I'm trying to get into your soul with these books. You know, I'm trying to like make you really think about where you fit in this stuff in your practice and your own power, because the first thing that happens is that you give up your power. When you are like, I'm powerless and I'm a passenger on my life, then they got you, you know. But when you can actually see and be like, oh, actually, this is where I pushed on white supremacy. This is where I actually like redid that part, you know. So for some people that's hard to admit, but for me, I think it's a breakthrough because that means now you actually have some power over it, right? So I think you do both. I think that there are some people that are built to go in and infiltrate and be part of that and switch things around. And there are some people that's going to work and push from the outside. You know, King's thing was he was in Lyndon B. Johnson's ear, who actually was not very progressive personally, right? But he appealed to his interest and said, if you don't want these Negroes about ready to burn this shit down, like if you don't want to burn it down, like you want to deal with me. I'm just letting you know because this is what's about to happen. And I think that that's just a very smart way to kind of go about it. I think you do both. I don't think you take any options off the table. I think that we do need to better coordinate. And I think that you can actually build these institutions on your own, whether it's that book club or I put out a playlist, a YouTube playlist that's less than an hour of 10 things that kids can watch and that you can watch with your kids that do everything from show you powerful Black women to talk about Black joy to actually talking about the history of this country and how it's built. All of this don't have to be like super sad stuff either, right? Part of this is actually in this institution is teaching joy. Like, you know, just shout out to our other brother on the A Black Hands. Like he just did a show about Insecure and like we just had fun. Like it was just fun. So much so that I just did a Zoom call. I didn't even use our fancy stuff, but I had brothers from my high school that I was friends with, and now we're grown. And we just talked and laughed. We just caught up and we just shared it. And that thing blew up more than stuff that I spend hours like getting ready to kind of publish because joy speaks to us, right? And I think that without our invisible institutions, none of that stuff happens. So we need a Freedom Friday. I need that damn Insecure thread. I need, you know, the stuff with my friends. I need these history lessons. Like we have to stay multifaceted. And once we realize that when we do our own thing, we rule the world. I said this in a history lesson, like 13.6% of the United States is what Black people represent. But in places where we don't check for them, where there's culture, how we dress, our music, whatever, we lead the world. We are the trendsetters. But when we try to be them, whether it's financial and education, where do we all, and policing and all this stuff and system stuff, where do we fall? We fall dead last. We fall dead last every single time. And if you can't recognize what the through line is, one is us trusting us and doing what we need to do, and the other is following behind and wanting to sniff behind these people, it's very simple to me. So I want to see more Black content, and I'll join every Freedom Friday and every Insecure group and every book club or whatever, because that's what we got to do. We got to start trusting us.
You always come up with a really powerful idea. So Black content is a weapon. We can weaponize Black content shared socially, informally, formally, however we do it. One of our watchers here just, you know, hit a couple of comments around playlists. You mentioned playlists and book lists, and wherever two of us gather,
right?
It's the like Christian thing, right? Yeah, wherever two of us gather in His name, you know, it becomes a powerful thing. So we could build our own mini institutions. You don't have to start granting. Charles or Cole. El Mekki, you have talked about in this show, out of school time. Kaya Henderson thinks a lot about what Black people could be doing on Saturdays for our kids to actually advance them in the way that Jews and Koreans and others do, and Chinese, not just depending on the school system to educate their kids fully. Education that you get in the public school is education for America, for Americanizing. In Chinese school or a Korean school or Jewish day schools, other types of schools, is where you get your people, your history, your culture. And I think we could do the same thing.
Yeah. Definitely should be doing the same. Even when I look at some of the groups who may not be as accepted as the Italians are today. So Iranians, Indo-Pak community, things like this. A lot of these are Muslim communities, but even outside the masjids, the places of worship, they have these cultural centers that they build and create, and where their culture is evident. You walk in, you think you're in mini Iran, or you walk in the Indo-Pak community culture center, you think that you're in there. That's what we have to do for our communities as well. Right. And it's not just to combat the schools, it's to combat everything you said the children see as far as whiteness, but also everything they see there's a bar on every corner. There's an ad for this on every block. So it's also to combat those things. Right. And so, my mom used to always say, if anybody's going to brainwash my children, it's going to be me. And I used to hate that as a kid. I'm like, I don't want to be brainwashed by nobody. When I got older, I understood. You know what I mean? They're going to communicate things about that they want us to think about them as well as ourselves. This is why they start history in a lot of textbooks with slavery. They want to think about, you to think about yourself in a particular way. Suppose every Black person committed to starting we're going to talk to our children about prior slavery, because we understand that slavery isn't our history. Slavery is what interrupted our history. So suppose we start pre-interruption. What happened to pre-interruption? What was going on? If they understand, and all the research shows that there were Black people who sailed here on purpose prior to Columbus, and that there's evidence all up and down, Florida to the tip of South America. Suppose that's where folks would start wait a minute. And then kids, you don't have to actually brainwash them at that point. If you present them with information, they'll start thinking, wait a minute, they had to be mariners in order to do that, which means they had to be, astronomers. They had to know math and science. They had to know wood carving, right? To get there, they had to understand the patterns of the seas and the winds. Suppose we all committed to just starting there, but everywhere you can go, if you to start the pre-interruption, you're going to start informing them. And then the legacy parenting, and we got to bring Hillary Beard on the 8 Black Hands one of these days, just to share about, what happens when we have those things that we all can finish the sentences, be seen, not heard.
That's right.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Right? All of those things, because that mutes Black children in a lot of ways. And we did it to protect our children, but sometimes now we're just doing it because we're exhausted, we're tired, we're traumatized, and we're like, I got to get A and B done. Just leave me alone right now, Black child. They're already getting that in the outside world. So we also have to adapt our parenting to the wars that our children have been born into.
Wow. That's powerful. That's real deep. That's too deep on a Friday morning. But I love it.
I love it, man.
I love it. This word pre-interruption makes me think, I have a little bit of pushback on it. It's not real pushback, but I've studied a lot the Maori people of New Zealand who eventually took their kids out of the public schools in that system. And the reason that they did it was they tried reforming them for years and years and years and years. And they worked with the government. They worked against the government. They did everything. They went through a school reform movement and era, and nothing came out the other end better. So what they did was they said, okay, our children are losing their language, their heritage, their background, and it's decentering them. And when we put them into the system, it accelerates that decentering. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull our kids out in kindergarten and give them their training first. They're training them in their own history and culture and whatnot. And then they figured out, you know what, when we put them in first grade, you erase all of that. So we're going to have to keep them for kindergarten and first. The short story is they got through third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade. And eventually, so now they have a Maori system that goes all the way through college. They have a Maori college. They have a whole system that you can go through K through 16, steeped in Maori. And the reason that they said they did it was because their big awakening was, we realized that we would never be able to have our kids get a healthy, humane education in the colonist system. That was the aha for them. We couldn't tweak it enough. We couldn't fix it enough. We couldn't unscrew it enough. It actually was always going to be what it is. The reason I say I want to take issue with this pre-interruption thing is they base some of what they do on Paulo Freire, and he has a word that I can guarantee you I can't pronounce.
Conscientiousness, yeah.
You know what I'm saying, right? I can guarantee you I can't say it. But there's levels of which you become healthier when you're getting rid of white supremacy, white savagery, white colonization. The first level is decolonizing yourself and your materials in your life. Decolonizing, though, is only like treating an illness. It's not making you healthy. It's just treating the illness. So decolonizing is just step one. So when we say decolonize the schools and all of that, that's still centering colonization as the thing. What do you become after you're no longer colonized is really what Freire was trying to get to. Like, what if you were never colonized? What would be your natural state that you would be in? Because that's where we're trying to get our people and our children, to that state. And it's that word I can't say. Try it again, Dr. Cole.
It's
like conscientization or something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
it's very hard to say.
But it's also the self-actualization. I mean, it depends on who you're talking to, is different terms. But exactly, right? Like if everything you do is rooted in that trauma of what was done to you, right? Like, you never are truly free, right? It's your critique to me about my book, like Crack Baby Residue, right? Like, I'm fully aware of that, right? Like, but a part of me just wants to get that out and have it, right? But that's essentially the point that you're making. It's like, what are you beyond that era? Like, what are you like without that piece? So what am I like? It becomes, white supremacy becomes a crutch if everything we do is in response to white supremacy. So what am I without that, right? And that's something that I think we need to think about as people. But I think it's tied to our history. And I think one of the things that we have to do, Chris, is everybody actually has something that they can add value to. Like, I don't care if you only graduated from the 5th grade, right? Like, listen, I bought this house. I love it. I'm very blessed about it. But none of my book smarts did a damn thing for me when something broke here. It took my cousin, who is a retired firefighter, that knows how to fix things, right? But here's what can you give to the people? You know, what can you offer? I can offer up some technical skills of what. Listen, Tanisha Peoples, she has a show out. I've been yelling at her for so long about using her voice because I just think she's amazing, and y'all should go watch her show. Like, it's dope. And it's fine that I have nothing to do with that. You know what I'm saying? But my point was, we need to be hearing from you. Like, if you got people that can add, if there's somebody right now that has carpentry skills, then they should like be actually getting that stuff out, because it's really, really important. You know what I mean? And anybody that owns a home has learned that, right? Like, but I think that you should be pumping up people that's doing great stuff. My favorite thing to watch on the internet right now is these workouts that Ray does with his daughter. I think that it does something for me, man. Like, I don't know. I've been on this thing about honoring Black dads. Like, that's the most, it don't get more beautiful than that, right? Or even this morning when you were trying to find a video, you were like, where's that video Josh did for me, right? Like, that's a father-son thing, yo. Like, it's so important. And I think that until we start to see the value in ourselves and what everybody brings, and that everybody has a contribution to make, and you bring everybody into that tent, that's when we start to build out an existence beyond and being in response to white supremacy. I want to get to a point where I don't care about white supremacy. I'm talking about us, because those people that you described, they not thinking. Like, there are some real free people out there in these worlds that ain't thinking about all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go off like that.
That's a great point. Yeah. All great points.
I think what you're saying, Chris, are two things. One, I met one of the New Zealand ministers of education back in Canada. Was up there with Arnie Duncan at this international education summit, and I was really, how she was describing that creation of the Maori schools and teaching them the Maori language, which had been dying You hear about the same thing. The Native Hawaiian language is dying, right? The only way to save that, which is a part of your self-agency, right? You have a language. You have a language outside of the King's English, right? Like that's such an important part of your identity, and it is dying. Like, what does that do, right? We see how, with the Native American brothers and sisters and these schools where they use it to, what they say, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And so what they would try to do was, and these are not just some rabid racist drunk. This was their political position. This is the language used in the halls of Congress, all the way to their local, Indian bureau, right? And so like those are the same. That wasn't just for that group. That playlist, that blueprint, that is to crush all people who are not involved in the whiteness, who are not accepted into the whiteness. And so that what the Maori people did was so important. That's what Charlie Cobb did, right? Like he's saying, create our own institution. That's what Bob Moses is. That is just like they got the racist playlist. We also have to have that same blueprint. And when this is why that globalization on the other side, our part is so important, learning and knowing from other people. And what Cole said is so important. I don't remember who said this, but it was a Black woman who said, you know what? Don't fall into the trap of just responding to racism. Its goal is to get you so exhausted that all you're doing is responding to them and not building for us. If everything they say, then you got to run and say, no, see, we're beautiful. No, see, we're smart. No, see, we can create this.
Right.
Stop talking. Just do it. Your mission is for your people, not for them. Your mission is for your people. Put all that energy into building institutions, building schools. And I do think that we just have to too. I think right now, if we're to say like, oh, El Mackey, what do you do right now? It's two things. You flood the system, because tomorrow, when you talking about that Monday morning question, that Black child needs a vanguard Monday morning. So flood that system. And as Cole said, the other people should be building. We all know the parable of the river, right? Parable of the river is like you're pulling the children out of the water right now, and then some people leave to go upstream. They're like, yo, you abandoned us. You leaving. What are you doing? They're like, we're going to go F up whoever's throwing the babies in the water in the first place.
You're going upstream.
And let's not just respond in the moment. Let's make sure that we have multifaceted plans in our blueprint for Black liberation.
Brothers, this has been very powerful. This has been a powerful Friday. I always feel better on Fridays after we do something like this, because it's a little bit like kind of washing yourselves after a week of dealing with everything we're talking about right now. When you deal with this is racist, this is colonizing, when you're submersed in those thoughts all week because you're fighting the system. It's nice to come back and say, we have a counter story. We have our own story about our own excellence, and we have our own strategies. Like, we've all, I think, we've all studied a little bit of what has been civil rights strategy, Black power strategy, African strategies for liberation. And we just have to make sense of them today so that we don't go crazy, so that we know that we can fight for something. I want to end a little bit because I'm in Minnesota. We're at the epicenter of something that became a national smoke screen for what's really going on, actually. And we never thought it would come. We never thought we would see the day in Minneapolis, because Minneapolis has been so smug with its liberal, progressive lockhold on everything, like from top to bottom. White liberalism has us in the throes, and we never thought that the nation would get to see that this isn't the Disneyland of educational and economic opportunity that people claim us to be. When you think of Minnesota, you think of Minnesota nice. When you think about Minneapolis and Twin Cities, you think of progressive city with, basically clean parks, clean lakes, great bike trails, manicured lawns, all that type of stuff. It's a very clean city in many ways. It's dirty as hell when it comes to the underbelly of racism, though. So I want to end with a couple of things about Minnesota, but I do want to give both of you an opportunity to finish out any of your thoughts for this today. Give people a good word based on everything you said today. That helps us through this time, helps us reset what we should be thinking about right now?
We'll let Sharif go first this time.
All right, you do it. You do it. You do it.
I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing this. And as I said before, on 8 Black Hands, it's been the Somali brothers and sisters that I know there. They've been keeping me well and informed over the years, and so I think many of our cities, just like Bright Beam put out that report, many cities who label themselves liberal and progressive, they're talking about liberal and progressive for their kind, their people, their institutions, not ours. I would say Black parents, brainwash your children, brainwash them with this idea of like, what does Black power look like today? And Black power does not just mean getting more Black politicians to implement racist ideas that are in the system already. Make sure that as you audit schools, you audit them for how would a Black child experience school. So audit it to see how does it reinforce their positive racial identity. Who's in front of the classroom, what's on the walls, what are they reading, all of that. That's important. And then lastly, use out of school time as armor building and detox centers.
That's what's up. And I'm glad I let him go first because I can just say everything he said, build on that. And then I think, don't sleep on the invisible institutions. I think that we have to continue to build them, build your own circle where y'all are sharing knowledge and joys and dreams. The first thing that I got to get you to do to trap you and is to stop you from dreaming, is to take away the joy. And I've been actively just reclaiming it. I might go play ball. I watch things that I want to watch. I teach myself. I learn. I prepare a lot for 8 Black Hands and for Howard's University and check that out. And then I need those other spaces too, where I don't even use any of this stuff. Like the Zoom call with my friends that we just got going live. It's just connecting with people. I always got to find a silver lining. My granny said, to be truly free, always find something you like about even the person that you hate the most. And in this moment, how I'm doing that, without this moment, I would not have reconnected with old friends that I haven't talked to in over 10 years and just genuinely laughed and loved on them in front of people. And that's the best gift that all this tragedy has given to me. And I've also been trying to slow down. I've tried to call each and every one of you and just other people in my life that mean something to me and just getting a connection, getting an actual talking, hearing their voice connection. So that's what I'm doing. And that's what I like to leave people with: your joys and your dreams. Don't ever let that go away.
Mm-hmm. I actually, I appreciate both of you. You keep me sane. Charles, you always find a way to make things plain and simple and clarify. And I'm not clarified right now at this moment, as a matter of fact, because we're right in the middle of a mess. It feels just messy right now. And I don't feel the clarity. I don't feel like this is just the clear signal through the noise, because right now it feels messy. Like we're in disarray. I just mean locally here where we are. And Sharif, you always bring the heat on the historical understanding of things, like the calm understanding that we should have when we're confident about the knowledge is in our favor, that the history is in our favor. If you just know it, you don't have to be crazy. You don't have to run out there and be throwing Molotov cocktails all the time, because you have the confidence of your own history and your own knowledge. So I appreciate both of you. I hope you two and the people who are watching, who I love every morning, that you all come here and give me your time, this hour of time, will indulge me just for a couple of minutes, because I actually just do want to say something about Minnesota and Minneapolis, but I want to show you a couple of things as I say it. So can I do that? Will you guys indulge me just a couple of minutes about Minnesota?
I'm with you, bro.
So this is what's, this gets very nerve-wracking for me. Because Minnesota does live a lie, and it's not unlike San Francisco or Seattle or other places that also live lies, but we just are better at it, I think, than other places are. Quickly, this is the Minneapolis Public Schools district right here. This is the data. This is Black students on the left, and this is white students on the right. Okay, Minneapolis public schools, liberal city, highly college educated, lots of resources, never fails a referendum on the public schools. They always get their tax money and more. People vote to tax themselves more money to give to the public schools. 80% of the people in Minneapolis don't have kids in the public schools, and they're mostly white. The public schools are mostly of color, right? So we have a school system in the middle of a white city that's full with kids of color. And in it, this is how the white kids are doing, right? This right here does not meet proficiency, 61%. Partially meets, 20%. So what's that add up to?
That's 80.
That's 81%, right? So this is the little bar up here of the kids that are actually meeting. 15% are meeting proficiency and 3% are exceeding. And if you look over here, the white kids, it's the exact opposite. Almost all the white kids are doing well. In Minneapolis public schools, you can see a trend line, 2019, 2018, 2017. I can guarantee you, if you keep going back year by year by year by year, this is the problem that we live with in Minneapolis, because this bumper crop of people that you turn out of our schools every year actually end up working for, or being policed by, or being supervised by, or being the servants of these people over here, right? That's just our story, and that's the way it works here. There is a political system in Minneapolis that keeps this going. The white progressive Democratic Farmer Labor Party of Minneapolis is in complete control of every political apparatus, and they only allow certain kinds of Negroes to ascend in that, ones that they can trust to keep us beholden to the system. I just want to show you this real quick. Nakima Levy-Pounds, Nakimi Levy-Armstrong now, sorry about that, and I have been working together for a very long time on different things. Back in 2015, we took on the school district because they had a virtualized slavery software that they were using to teach social studies in the classroom. So this is when we went after them for this. It was called Flight to Freedom. And the way that you, Mission 2, Flight to Freedom. And the way that you won the game and got coins is by, you were this person, this slave person right here. And you interacted with white people who would ask you questions, and you had to say the right thing to get coins, to get to freedom, right? And the right things that you would have to say were like basically subservient things. And this is what they were using in Minneapolis public schools to teach. Virtualized slavery programming. And this came to our attention because a 12-year-old black girl in a classroom of other people that didn't have many other 12-year-old black girls did not feel comfortable doing this at all, right? This is part of the social training in Minneapolis public schools. We didn't win this. We got them to stop doing this only in one way. They made it voluntary, right? They didn't completely ban it or take it out of the schools. They just made it voluntary that you would have to participate. Here in Minnesota, also, we had a lawsuit that was looking to make sure that kids had a constitutional right to well-rated teachers. Because in Minneapolis public schools, the worst rated teachers are in the schools that are the blackest. And I can show you a graph that shows you that the darker a classroom gets in Minneapolis public schools, the lower the pay for the teacher goes too. So there's a scatter plot that shows you all of our schools, and the darker a classroom gets, the less well paid the teacher is in that classroom. This was dismissed, and every liberal in Minnesota was happy that this got dismissed. And the entire apparatus of the white Minnesota Teachers Union fought to make sure that we never have a right to good teachers, right? To great teachers. Right now, we have a constitutional amendment from the Minnesota Federal Reserve and Alan Page, who's a former Viking, is now a Supreme Court justice, to give every child a constitutional right in the state of Minnesota to a quality education. It only changes a couple of lines in the Constitution, but it gives parents a real constitutional right to their kids being educated. And if there's malpractice or it isn't working out, it gives parents the right to sue for their rights. Teachers Union is against this too. Entire apparatus of the white Teachers Union don't know what to do with this because it polls very highly, polls very well. But what they're using as an excuse is, well, this will cause too many lawsuits, which will cost a lot of money, and that money will come out of the budgets that we should be using for education. So we shouldn't have a constitutional amendment that gives people the right to sue. because it'll have too many lawsuits and twisted logic. This is Minnesota, though, in a nutshell. This is how we operate. At the same time, I'm going to end with this. I don't think that people know that our charter schools in Minnesota, I say it all the time, we have lots of ethnic charter schools. We have Somali charter schools, Hmong charter schools, Latino charter schools, Native American charter schools unto themselves, coming out of the communities that have been left behind by the regular schools. And the teachers union, again, entire apparatus of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party and the white teachers union and their heads, our white governor, our white commissioner of education who used to work for the AFT, our white local teachers unions, they all have banded together to try and create chaos for charter schools. They want to have a moratorium like everybody else has now. They want to stop these ethnic charter schools from growing and from having kids. They want to get us back into their system where they make the money off of the backs of our kids. One of the ways that they're working to do that is they're participating in a lawsuit, a desegregation lawsuit that would punish ethnic charter schools if they didn't attract white students. They wouldn't punish white schools that don't attract kids of color. They would punish ethnic charter schools that don't appeal to white kids, don't do a good enough job of getting white kids in. This is Minnesota in a nutshell. These numbers have not changed for years. They know that they're making money off of our backs. Oh, and by the way, let me just throw in the St. Paul Federation of Teachers pension fund is invested heavily in private prisons and child detention centers, and they know it. People have brought it to their attention, including me, and they are very flaky about addressing it or dealing with it. This is Minnesota. Minnesota nice, Minnesota lovely, best place in the country to raise a child. Number 3 worst place in the country to raise a black child in a black family. Okay? That's why it is well past time that, goddamn it, we have some smoke coming out of these pristine neighborhoods and pristine buildings with their phony, plastic-ass white politicians and white power structure that continually grinds black people, brown people under the wheels of their goddamn hypocrisy of this system. And I never thought I would see the day that people in other parts of the country knew that we were the capital of liberal bullshit. And it's so sad that it takes like the 18th or 19th or 20th black man who dies at the hands of a Minnesota police officer, Minneapolis police officer, who has a police union run by a known and avowed white supremacist, who has the tattoos to prove it and the gang membership to prove it. It's so sad that that's what it took for people in Alabama and Oakland and in New York to know that this is what the capital of white liberal bullshit looks like. I'm sorry to go on for so long, but I thank you, brothers, for indulging me.
Thank you.
And I thank you to the listeners, the watchers, everybody for indulging me. But my story and this local story isn't just ours. I am sure that wherever you live, you have a liberal city like this that is grinding the black people beneath its own like hypocrisy of the stated equitable values that they have, that they say that they have, the declared values, and what the actual values actually are. Thank you, everybody who has been watching. This has been another Freedom Friday episode. It's my favorite day of the week because I believe it gets real for us on these days. Dr. Cole, I am immensely appreciative to you for jumping on so quickly this morning to give us that knowledge around the book club. And Elmeki, always appreciative of what you bring to my life and to these discussions every week.
Thanks for the platform.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Freedom Fridays.